So a long time ago, I went to university in this city in Toronto, and it didn't really go as well as planned. And after my first year, I received notice from the school, and they basically said, you're going to need to take a very long vacation. So what does a 20-year-old that's just been kicked out of university do? Put on a backpack and go to Europe, of course. So I went to Europe, and I met my future business partners actually traveling around Europe. And when I was broke, I did what any reasonable broke backpacker would do. I came back to Canada, chez mom and dad. And so when I was back in Toronto, I was having discussions with our partners, my business partners, and we were trying to determine where should we locate our business. The business that we were intending to build was the manufacture of equipment for maintenance of oil refineries and later city infrastructures. And so we really had to make a decision on two elements. One was access to cheap, skilled labor, and the other one was access to low-cost manufacturing facility. So when you looked at Toronto, it was far too expensive on both fronts. So my partners who were located in the UK, they came across this small little town, and I mean little, it was like a village, surrounded by 3 coal mines that were closed, and it had 60% unemployment. So the village came to us with a proposition, and they basically said, we'll give you a manufacturing facility at no cost, provided that you keep a certain number of people employed every month. So at that point, I realized that the town, the village, was actually competing for our business. That really told me that cities are competitive entities. They compete for you and me, they compete for jobs, and they compete for revenue. They're just like companies. So as the business grew and we outlived this little village, we actually needed access to more higher quality infrastructure and services. And so cities competed for our business, and they competed on the basis of the quality of their infrastructure and related services. So those are things like housing, education, energy, and transportation. Transportation is that sort of connective tissue that connects us all together. It connects us to our jobs, it connects us to our activities, and it connects us to our social networks. So at a very high level, cities really compete on quality of life. They really compete on livability. So what I want to talk to you about today is the importance of sustainable public transport to make cities more competitive by helping them to deliver enhanced social, environmental, and economic outcomes for everybody, for all constituents. And that basically produces prosperous communities. So we've all experienced the image on the left, right? This looks like a commute just about in any city on a Monday morning. But to me, this reminds me of an experience that I had in my first business meeting in Thailand, in Bangkok. I was living in Kuala Lumpur. I left early that morning to arrive in Bangkok at 8 o'clock in the morning for a 10 o'clock meeting. 2 hours, right? No problem. I'm going to get there easily. Boy, was I wrong. I got there at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I sat in gridlock for 5 hours. And when I looked around me, what I saw were single occupants in cars, in complete gridlock. 80% of us commute alone in cars every day, and 10% of us, only 10% of us, use public transport. So that big, beautiful bus that you see on the right actually is really beautiful because it moves large numbers of people over large distances. And the other thing about it is it's flexible. It's not tied to tracks like a train, like a streetcar, like a subway, so it can go anywhere. So if I look at these two images, the one on the right to me looks a little bit more sustainable, a lot more resource efficient, and it certainly looks a lot more productive. And by the way, all the people on the left can actually fit into that vehicle on the right. So along comes COVID, and the world is turned on its head. And so what happens is that public transport takes a beating. In the first few months, ridership is reduced, particularly bus ridership is reduced by 60 to 80%, and it kind of levels out at about 50% below its usual ridership numbers. So that's 50% reduced ridership of the 10%. So what do? we get right back into our cars alone, and we continue this unsustainable commuting trend, and we actually increase that trend by 34% during COVID. But there's a bigger story here, and the story is that there was already something that was happening before COVID, which was this trend to actually have more distributed workforces. So COVID has just accelerated that process. And I believe that working from home and social distancing are going to be a part of the fabric of a post-COVID world. So what does that changing demand look like? Well, it kind of looks like this, right? Lots of empty seats. So I think we've all been on a bus on a weekend or an evening where there's all kinds of empty seats. So what happens, though, when these new commuting trends start to produce empty seats on what were once productive routes? How do we solve for that? So I think the answer here is sustainable on-demand transit combined with the electrification of fleets of buses, but it's large vehicles, not vans, large vehicles. It's extremely important. So what do I mean by on-demand transit? Today, buses travel on fixed routes, and they stop at every stop, regardless of whether there's somebody there. So if there's empty stops, there are empty seats. What on-demand transit does is it only stops where people want to be picked up when they want to be picked up, and it takes them directly, without transfers, to where they want to be dropped off when they want to be dropped off. It's built on sort of 4 principles. This notion of equal and convenient access for everybody, which means that nobody's cut out of the system and everybody has an opportunity to lead a productive life. Those are extremely powerful social equity and social inclusion outcomes. The flexibility of buses allows them to move freely and cover large service areas. And they can do that in times of changing demand. So they're able to adjust in real time to changes in demand and density. So that drives huge operational efficiencies like less fuel, less maintenance, less carbon emissions. Now, if I electrify that fleet, no fuel, almost no maintenance, 0 emissions. Huge environmental benefits. Lastly, cities need buses to be productive. Why? Because productivity equals economic viability. So if I've got lots of empty stops and lots of empty seats, that's not very economically viable. If I've got lots of bums in seats, that's really good economic viability and actually produces profitable routes. And so it delivers the economic outcomes that cities are looking to actually produce with this type of activity. So if we do all of this right, we'll actually unlock the potential for city councils to reimagine very important policy decisions based on things like housing, land use, and infrastructure, and the effect of climate change on each of those, and much, much more. So if I can leave you with one thought, I will leave you with this. I think I've explained to you why cities need sustainable on-demand transit to be competitive. And by the way, that's exactly what Pantonium does as a Canadian company, and that gets back to what John Doerr was talking about. We're actually achieving the objectives that he actually mentioned in the video just before this session started. But we also need the planet to survive. So I would like to urge you to use your voice, to use your vote, to talk to your city councilors, to tell them we need clean, sustainable, efficient, on-demand transport in our cities. Thank you very much. Oh, and by the way, take the bus a little bit more often. Thank you.